Hi, this is Delegate Eric Ludke, Majority Leader of the Maryland House of Delegates, and you're listening to the Conduit Street Podcast, the official podcast of the Maryland Association of Counties, and one of the best sources for dad jokes in the entire state of Maryland.
Hello and welcome to the Conduit Street Podcast. Kevin Kinnally here with Michael Sanderson. Michael, session has begun as we are here on Thursday, January 14th. Yesterday, of course, was opening day. We'll get into all of that. But first of all, how are you holding up? How are things at the household?
Everything is okay here, healthy and safe and so forth. And you say the session has begun, but I don't know. I haven't been in Annapolis. I haven't been out on circle. I'm not sure I can verify that that's really happened. I have to count on your reporting. So how are you and yours?
Doing really well. And even if you were in town, you may not know that that session has begun and is underway because it is a ghost town here in Annapolis. I have been the designated MACo appointee to be in town. A couple of us were here yesterday, and we're not running around looking to get into anything, but even when you head into town and you drive home, you just notice that it's really, the streets are empty, and it's so odd and eerie to know that session is here, everybody's in town, but there's nobody out on the streets. And I guess, Michael, that's a good thing as we look to contain the virus and its possible spread around town as the General Assembly comes back.
Right. I mean, the last thing that our elected leaders want is to themselves trigger a super spreader event or become a cause of more people getting sick or being exposed and so forth. So, they've got to do the work of the people, and we've heard that phrase quite a lot already this week. So that's right. They've got a job to do. There's an awful lot of precautions in place. So I think it's worth let's spend a few minutes before we get into deeper substance in this episode. Let's spend a few minutes talking about what this session really is going to look and feel like now that we've had a couple of days to reflect on. A lot of precautions that are visible, and now that we've seen people speaking from behind plexiglass barriers and so forth, wow, this is going to be really different, isn't it?
Yeah, no doubt about it. And yeah, we'll get into what this is looking like. And then I want to also talk, Michael, today about the biggest item on the agenda for session, and that's going to be responding to the pandemic. We've already seen a big proposal to provide for relief for Maryland residents and businesses. But when it comes to session, yes, it's very odd. It's very strange. Yesterday, we saw the House and the Senate convene. The House, some of them were not allowed into the chamber as they opened session, which was weird. The Senate, you saw all the plexiglass, and I actually talked to a few senators who showed me some pictures that, it looks like they're in a jail cell in the back. You can't see anything. It's really weird. We watched the floor sessions were broadcast live. There were a few technical glitches there. Some audio went out, but overall I thought it went pretty well. That seems like it's going to work just fine. The committees have started, hearings. As we said, they were going to jump right into it. Those are all broadcast online on YouTube, and testimony is done through Zoom. So a lot of the stuff we knew was going to happen. I am surprised, Michael, that I didn't see more people out and about. I figured, they're all in town. It seems like they need to go eat or do something, but it is a good thing. And I think the message has really gotten out that we don't want you lingering. We don't want you loitering. We don't want you hanging around town because of what you just talked about. Is they don't want to be the ones to create a super spreader event. I know the city of Annapolis is in contact with the General Assembly and trying to make sure that they're maintaining the highest health standards. So it's here, a lot of what we thought, but we're starting to now see how this is working. And I do think there will be some changes. All of this stuff is in flux when it comes to testimony and how they're going to handle the floor. So, maybe some changes to come. But I mean, even you watching remotely, what was your first impression when the House and the Senate convened yesterday?
Well, I guess it's a shock to the eye to me that I had read all these memoranda saying here's how we're going to conduct business and we're going to do these things and that. Like you said, a number of members of the House were not invited to the floor. And what we mean by that is they're going to participate. They had sort of this lottery system and so forth, but members of the House of Delegates are going to participate in floor sessions and debate through a remote access channel that's plugged into a separate room in the House of Delegates office building. And that's just, it's just going to be really different. And I was mentally prepared for things to be unusual, but watching the lead-in, watching the nominating speeches on the floor of the Senate with all the members behind these sort of plexiglass barriers, and I think the good Senator Pinsky made a comment about it. He said, I've been telling people this is like being in a series of phone booths, but no one knows what a phone booth is anymore. But for those of us who do, that was an apt description. Somebody described it being like in a hall of mirrors, a sort of a funhouse setting, only maybe without the fun. It's going to look and feel weird. I don't know about you, but like, I'm a politics nerd. I'm in love with that romantic concept of the legislator, the senator stands up and gives this grand oratory on the floor of the body during the debate and persuades her peers that her point of view is right and they should vote that way. And then things go that way and people have the big celebration that they made this grand accomplishment. And this year just isn't going to be conducive for that kind of setting. There won't be grand oratory when you're behind plexiglass. You'll be able to say the same words, but I'm not sure you can have the same captivating effect, right?
Being behind the plexiglass, it's hard to be as effective. But the interesting thing yesterday too, you mentioned that auxiliary chamber that they've set up in the House office building. The House members that weren't invited into the chamber had nowhere to go because they first had to pass a special rule that would allow for that auxiliary chamber. So until that was done, the auxiliary chamber doesn't exist, right? Because that rule has to be passed. So really, it was a strange moment because again, they didn't have anywhere to go until they passed the special rule to allow the chamber. The other interesting thing, Michael, and I don't know if you knew this, I didn't know this, but this is a nerdy podcast. Apparently, neither the House nor the Senate can adjourn for more than 3 days, right, without letting the other know or getting permission from the other side. So they also had to pass special rules there because they do plan on adjourning for more than 3 days. We know that the House isn't planning on coming back to the floor for a while. And, I think it's just very interesting that they also want to now incorporate more pro forma sessions. So, for instance, they'll be able to have just a few people on the floor when they can introduce bills and read them across. That's not normal, but that's something that they're doing to avoid having, too many people in the chamber at once. So a lot of special rules passed on day one, and that just adds to this, that it's going to be different. You're only going to see a few people on the floor at once, maybe introducing bills, reading them across. We don't need the full membership anymore. That's just interesting to me generally.
Yeah, I think as like government wonks or nerds or whatever we call ourselves these days, that's a curiosity. But I don't know, maybe some of this sticks. I mean, the notion of doing an awful lot of pretty boring business that virtually all the time every member will consent to. The idea of assigning bills to committees and just like doing housekeeping, keep the doors open and the clocks running and so forth. The idea of doing that with the implied consent of the full body in a pro forma session, but telling most members, you don't really have to be here for this. I don't know. Like, we're going to do that this year for obvious reasons, but is it possible that becomes part of the future legislative calendar here and in other state houses? I don't know. Maybe we'll rethink some of these old school things. Dinosaurs like me want things a certain way, but maybe it's time that, we wake up.
I think it's interesting, and it is one of those that maybe does stick, although you do have to have everybody there when you give out all the rewards and recognize the sports teams and accomplishments. We're used to that. That's not going to happen this year either. There are no pages this year. Typically, you see the pages in the gray jackets running around. They're all remote, and I think they're still hosting a program, but it's certainly not going to be the same. And Michael, when it comes to testimony, I mean, we've talked about what that might look like. There are new guidelines. Obviously, this is being done remotely, so you have to participate via Zoom. But the first thing is you have to have testimony in 2 days in advance. And if you are chosen, if you're going to go and you're going to give oral testimony, if you're chosen to be one of the select few that they will hear testimony from, you get an email with the Zoom link the night before. So I testified on a bill today. I got the link last night. It seemed to work just fine. They let you into the Zoom meeting. You're muted. You unmute yourself when it's your turn, and then you log off. But it is weird to be just staring at a screen. I mean, we're all used to Zoom by now, but you're staring at all the senators' faces, in my case today, and trying to get a read. Are they getting this? Are they understanding? Or is anybody nodding their head? Does anybody look angry, right? So all the things you would normally be looking for in person, and the ability to read the room. It's something that's so important when you're testifying, to be able to understand that this senator is over it. You don't need to say too much, or maybe you need to get into a little more detail. That just is really, really hard to do when you're doing it through a computer.
I think without a doubt. And I think you're awfully skillful at that read the room ability to understand this is an opportunity to get into some depth because people are paying attention and this topic is interesting, or the thing I'm talking about seems pretty important. And then other times it's like, you know what, we've done this in writing, I'll abbreviate. And that's, I don't know, I think it's probably going to be its own acquired skill for you and the many stakeholders who need to make appearances a lot, to understand how do you do that now when there's not really a room to read. I don't know. My first time in the barrel is going to be tomorrow. You have any particular tips for me? Because you've been through it once and I have not yet.
Well, I will say it's very important. It wasn't me who did this, but someone else that was testifying on another bill. So you're watching the hearing on YouTube, and then you're also logged into Zoom to testify. It's really, really important that you mute that YouTube or exit out altogether, because if you don't, you're going to have pretty bad feedback, and nobody likes that. So important, everybody's learning. I don't think that's going to happen moving forward. I think people will realize, but, unmuting yourself maybe on Zoom too. We had that issue a few times where people were just talking, and we've all been there. So I don't know. I mean, I think it's interesting. The Budget and Taxation Committee today, they were not in the committee room, of course. They are remote, so they also don't have that benefit of being able to read the room and look around and understand what's happening. So when the committee chair is trying to line up questions, I think it's odd, because normally a committee chair can just look around and know somebody has a question, the light turns on. Here, they really have to pay attention. And, everybody's learning. I think one question got missed today, but I think everybody understands this is new. And so you'll be just fine. You know how to use Zoom by now.
For sure. But we'll see. We've just posted some guidelines, sort of intended for the members of the county community, but I think it could be for use by anybody, of the timetables and the expectations for each of the committees in the General Assembly. There's some variations on a theme. One of the things that interests me the most is some committees apparently are going to use a process where all the questions on a given bill will be held until after all the people who wanted to testify on the bill have spoken. So rather than you speak and then you field questions, which is what you and I are used to, the system might be you speak, then 4 other people speak, and then 2 opponents speak, and now they open the field for questions for any of those people. That feels like a really different cadence and structure than we're used to. I wonder if that will be as effective. I get why you might want to do it in the space of economizing on time, but I'm wary of the idea of stay on the line, because in 45 minutes someone might have a question about one of the details that was in your 2 minutes. Woo.
Yeah, it's going to be hard to get people to hang around, I think, and especially when if testimony goes on and there are a bunch of questions, you have to hope that the person you're looking to get an answer from is still on the Zoom meeting. If not, you're out of luck. You'll have to follow up. Speaking of Zoom, Michael, it's not just the General Assembly that is meeting remotely. We held our first meeting of our legislative committee remotely, as well as our subcommittees. And of course, again, it's different. There are little things that you don't really think about until you're there, and you have to sort of figure it out on the fly. But the bottom line for me is they got through all the bills, they took positions. We are a member-driven organization, so we had to convene them early so that they could take positions on bills that affect counties. But what did you think overall, Michael, of the first meeting of the legislative committee and subcommittees?
Well, I miss our members. Like that, for me, that's really my bottom line. And I don't mean that to sound quite as personal and needy as it sounds, but really after not having our in-person summer conference and then not being able to do our winter event, you and I are usually on sort of a schedule throughout the year of getting out to be on the agenda for the county commissioners or go to lunch with the county council in various jurisdictions. So like we get to do a lot of face-to-face just chatting about local issues and talking about Annapolis with our elected representatives. And I'm like, Zoom is fine and it's useful, but I miss having the real in-person interaction. So we're going to do the smart thing and we're going to do the safe thing. We're going to have remote meetings and get through the agendas. And we're going to get the guidance we need from our elected leaders, and that's all good. It's still like there's something missing in the process when it is as distant as it feels when it's just faces on a screen. So, sorry for the lamentation, but I felt a little bit removed from what is otherwise a really hands-on and like intimate process, like going through bills and people interrupting each other and hands in the air and all that kind of stuff, and it just doesn't feel the same. But you're right, we need their guidance. They're the bosses, so we got we checked the box and they got their input and they told us what to do on a bunch of stuff. That's as it ought to be. I don't know, you've got an awful lot of water to carry on MACo's behalf this year with lots of different issues. You comfortable with how this is going to work out, you think?
I am becoming increasingly confident. I mean, once we had all those pre-file bills and, I just was very anxious, right? Because we're used to doing things a certain way. You don't want to miss anything. But yes, I'm very confident. I think our legislative committee is very confident. Everybody understands what we need to do. Everybody understands it's different, but we're all going to make it work. And it's not just us around town. Everybody's in the same boat. So I think generally people are going to be understanding and they're gonna work together well to get the work done. Yeah. So Michael, I want to pivot a little bit to one of the biggest, obviously the biggest issue of this session is at the top of everybody's list, and that is providing meaningful relief for people who are suffering amid the COVID pandemic. And we saw the first proposal, certainly won't be the last, but the governor introduced a proposal. He held a press conference. He talked about his $1 billion relief act, Michael, to sort of provide a lot of relief for individuals, for businesses, a slew of tax benefits, and we can walk through that a bit. But this won't be, as I mentioned, the last time we see a big proposal, and we shouldn't be wedded to what we've heard. People shouldn't think, well, this must be it, right? There are going to be a lot of different ideas on the table, right?
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. And the governor is also very skillful at reading the room. So he and his staff certainly recognize that we have families, workers, businesses who are all in some state of disarray or concern over their future. So he's trying to address a number of things under a big umbrella of relief. That's a big complicated acronym that I've already forgotten the components of, but the governor launches a big proposal. It sounds like some of which will need to be in legislation and some of which he can just execute on his own. And it's not fully clear to me which is which, but for him to say, here's my big umbrella proposal is exactly what you would expect to start off this momentous and unusual legislative session by saying, okay, now that we have all the decision makers in town, we're going to do the work of the people, and what they need is some relief. So here's my playbook and let's get to it. And I think that's basically how we've kicked off this session. No surprise.
Right. So it is the Recovery for the Economy, Livelihoods, Industries, Entrepreneurs, and Families Act, in case you really interesting, right? So again, it's individual payments for lower income Marylanders, help for small businesses, and some tax cuts. Michael, it's $1 billion bill. We haven't seen the bill, and neither has the General Assembly. We can talk about that in a second. But, when we talk about initial payments to low and moderate income Marylanders, these are people who have filed for the Earned Income Tax Credit. they would get payments of up to $450 for individuals, $750 for families, and then a second round of payments, another $150 for individuals and $250 for families. So I think that is what's going to get the most coverage, is that, we're talking about stimulus checks, direct checks to people who need it the most. I imagine that will be a component of other proposals that we see, but this always seems to get the most attention, writing checks for folks who need it.
Well, and I mean, a couple things that jump out to me. First of all, the earned income tax credit is not just for just if you're low income, but if you're a low income worker. So you are earning income, but you're still relatively low income. And right. I think, that's a class of Marylanders that are probably among the hardest hit by this, this health crisis and this economic crisis. So, and like sort of wedged in the details here, this is not going to be a new process where an individual needs to log in and apply or go to some physical office and apply. It's going to be, if you applied for this tax credit last year as someone who was eligible for the earned income tax credit in Maryland. I mean, this is an existing program that says we're going to give you some assistance and maybe even a tax refund instead of a tax payment at the end of the year. If you're working and still have relatively low income, if you applied for it last year, you're just going to get a check in the mail. It's going to be automatic. And for those of us who are worried about application processes and handling and getting the appropriate agency to do the appropriate paperwork, the idea of let's just mail out checks, I think that's going to resonate with an awful lot of Marylanders.
Absolutely. I mean, we all know about the problems that we've had with the unemployment system, and that still is an issue to an extent. So I think any way to speed this up, the comptroller already has the data; they can get money out right away. And again, this may not be exactly what the General Assembly decides to pass, but I think that's going to be a component of a lot of what they do are these checks to individuals and families. Another proposal in this bill, Michael, elimination of state and local taxes on unemployment benefits. I think a lot of people don't realize that unemployment benefits are taxable. The majority of states do tax unemployment benefits. Here in Maryland, they're taxed at the state and local level. And the governor wants to eliminate that, and he wants to do it retroactively back to 2020 as well. So the governor thinks this will save about $180 million for Marylanders, but it also means $180 million in state and local tax revenue will be lost.
All right. So as we sort of know, we're in this really weird spot with the state and local financial situation, with public revenues not really yet suffering from what is clearly a soft economy, in part because things have been propped up by federal assistance and by extra unemployment insurance and the like. To some extent, that has meant, hey, our income taxes have been relatively healthy as a result of a lot of people getting bailed out. Well, doing without some of that revenue would soften that for the moment. I think it'll be, in the aggregate, this will be a challenging issue. I don't think anyone wants to rush in and say, no, we really need to tax people who are unemployed and getting by on benefits. No one loves that idea. So you've got to balance all this stuff out. That'll be a challenge for state policymakers and also for the county level, because we count on income taxes as well. So that's going to be a component of this discussion this year for sure.
Definitely. And, another piece here that I think is interesting is the sales tax credits. These would top out at $3,000 a month, $12,000 over a 4-month period to allow businesses to have better cash flow. And the governor thinks this is going to help more than 55,000 businesses, and it's a $300 million in sales tax revenue that would otherwise go to the state. So an interesting way to do this, to provide business relief through sales tax credits. And then, of course, the governor wants to stop unemployment insurance rate hikes. Usually, if you're a business and you lay off a number of people, you typically have to pay more in unemployment insurance. And obviously with COVID, a lot of people have had to lay people off. So the governor temporarily did that with an executive order, and they want to make that law through this bill. And he estimates that that will save $218 million for businesses. So again, this is $1 billion omnibus relief package, and we'll see what the legislature wants to do. But one of the interesting things yesterday, Michael, was the governor had said, I want the General Assembly to pass my bill today, day one. And the response was?
Literally minutes later, the presiding officers, we were at an event being held by the Daily Record, and I'll say very ably stewarded through by Brian Sears, who's their ace reporter around Annapolis. But in interviews with the governor and then with the presiding officers, the governor said, I want to see my bill passed today. Why would we wait at all? And then the presiding officer, I think Speaker Jones, relatively quickly said, we don't even have a bill to pass. It was, for like Annapolis insiders, that was sort of a moment of levity. I wouldn't want to blow this out of proportion. That can sound a little bit like, oh, this is bureaucracy. You didn't fill out the form in triplicate and it's not on the appropriate blue paper. No, I think as a practical matter, the bill literally does not exist. It's not just that it hasn't gone through some primordial process. It literally hasn't been typed and submitted and named and numbered and so forth. So I think it'll get plenty of oxygen in the relatively short time ahead. I think that's a very, very safe bet.
Yes, this and other proposals. And I guess, Michael, generally, this is going to be a challenging session. They're going to have to figure out what kind of relief they want to provide. I think we all understand there's going to be a package that is passed to deal with the pandemic. And, from our perspective, Michael, from the county perspective, what are you looking for? What are counties looking for as part of this? I mean, we're obviously trying to make sure to protect our budgets and our revenue sources, because just like the state, we face a lot of uncertainty with revenues and the economy generally. But from the county perspective, when we talk about all this relief and all these proposals, what's in it for counties? What are counties looking to do? Well,
I would probably answer that first by taking like a half step back and referencing, we've done episodes of this podcast over the last several months talking about the role of the federal government in a crisis time like this, where states and counties and other local governments have to balance our budget year to year. The federal government is the only level that has some real immediate flexibility. So, the state can talk about digging into a rainy day fund and getting some one-time cash. I'm sure that there could be a county who says, oh, we've got this money set aside because we know we're going to have to close our landfill in a few years. We'll spend that money and we'll try and replenish it later. I mean, you can do some of that. You can eat some seed corn, but in the aggregate, this whole conversation about what are we up for probably hinges still on Congress. So, and the federal government, that if the feds can come through with some support for state and local governments, then we are going to be able to handle this. And the local side of trying to provide some temporary internet infrastructure for kids who are learning remotely and for workers who are trying to do telecommuting through the best means they can, we got to get those kids out of the Wendy's parking lot. And if some temporary technology solves that, we need some federal help to do that. Caroline County can't afford to do that just digging under the couch cushions. So I feel like a lot of this stuff, including the ability to do without tax revenue and stuff short term, I feel like a lot of that is contingent on, do the feds come through for those of us who are on the front lines? So if they do, I think we can play ball with an awful lot of these proposals. If they don't, then we're going to have a spring that's full of difficult reckoning for our school budgets, for our health departments, for public safety agencies, for our fire departments and EMTs, like the whole laundry list of the people who are properly our heroes for getting us through the last year. And then the budget's going to come due to make things right for the next year, and we're going to find ourselves with empty pockets. I think it's going to be a gigantic challenge if we don't get a round of help from the feds. Forgive me for maybe overstating that a bit, but I think that's a really big deal. As far as this legislative session, everybody's going to be sensitive to the one-time peculiar nature of what we're in the middle of, and hopefully on the back end of. So I think everybody's going to use a different lens to evaluate all these things than in just an ordinary year.
Couldn't agree more. I mean, obviously, the federal side plays into this a lot. Also, the vaccine rollout, how quickly Maryland can get vaccines from the feds and then roll them out. I know counties are very interested. They're working very hard at the local level to make sure that through local health departments and other means, people are aware that they need to get vaccinated, that they are pushing these vaccines out as fast as possible. So all of this is contingent on a lot of things outside of the General Assembly's control to an extent at this point. So I do think that there are a lot of unknowns and a lot of variables here that certainly may influence decisions this spring. But Michael, I guess we'll go ahead and leave it there for today. We have a busy tomorrow. Tomorrow is Friday, a busy weekend. We'll be reading bills again, of course. There's no such thing as a weekend during session. But next week, I'm sure we'll be back, and I think we'll have some interesting stuff to talk about throughout session.
I'm looking forward to it, and looking forward to actually setting foot in Annapolis during session, whatever exactly that's going to mean.
You might have to wear long pants if you come here. Just I know you've been avoiding that, so you might have to do that if you come to town. Just letting you know.
I broke my 10-month streak in order to be at the office for our legislative committee meeting, so I no longer am feeling antsy about that. But 10 solid months without long pants was sort of a personal achievement for me. I feel good about that.
It is pretty good. We'll leave it there. As always, if you enjoy the podcast, you can go ahead and subscribe. That way, all of these episodes will be sent directly to you. You can also follow along on social media, Facebook, Twitter, and of course, the Conduit Street blog. But for Michael, this is Kevin signing off, and we will talk to you next week.